at the end of the day, you have to make the best decisions possible. And for the most part, sometimes they may not make any sense.
Welcome to this week's podcast, and today I'm in Beverly Hills interviewing Mr. Bryan O'Rourke. Bryan is the CEO of the Fitness Industry Technology Council, and I came to talk to Bryan about technology within the fitness industry and also what is required for businesses to be successful in the next 5 to 10 years. So I was expecting to be talking about some new technology that hasn't yet been invented or some new business models. And one of the things that came out of the interview was trust and the importance of trust for businesses to be successful in the future. So I'd love to know what you think about this episode. Please listen to it right to the end, because there's some pretty interesting stuff that Bryan talks about at the very end of the episode. Love to hear your thoughts. If you think it's valuable to you, please feel free to contact us on email, on social media, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, thanks, Bryan, for inviting me to your wonderful hotel in Beverly Hills. We've followed each other around the world almost, haven't we?
Yeah, we see each other in Cologne a few times, I think, and I love your content, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I've seen many of my colleagues, friends, and clients on your show, and it's great content, so keep doing it.
Thank you. Thanks. And you've also got your podcast. What sort of motivated you to do that?
So the Fitness Industry Technology Council is a nonprofit, and we have 45 different global brands in our space contributing to that. And our dictum and mission is to educate. So that's a great content platform to do it, and that's why we do it. So, and we have people like you, I hope, on soon. We had Emma, we've had David, we have many folks, David Minton, Wright, a bunch of different people that you've had. So getting their perspective so others can listen is good.
Yeah. How long have you been doing that?
It's been 3.5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
We had a conversation off camera about trust.
Yeah.
And what's your view about sort of companies nowadays, and how you told the story about trust being an all-time low.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that story and what you think about how companies can develop trust.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Number one, the customer is in more and more control of, they have more options. They have access to whatever information they want to have access to. And so the Edelman barometer that we talked about, right, measures trust globally. It's been doing it for a number of years. In the U.S., trust has never been at a bigger low than it has since the Civil War. Polarization is immense. Some of that is a result of social media and digital. These platforms are promoting conflict to drive attention. It's reinforcing bad things. Also, there's so much information and the ability to get information, and so many people trying to sell people on the here and now. Customers have great bullshit meters. Sorry, you bleep that out. And so the battle for trust is really about the battle for customer. And not in a transactional sense, hopefully, but more in a meaningful sense. It's a big challenge, because I think businesses have to really think about long term. The more transactional you are, the more you're really sacrificing long term for the benefit of the near term. And given the business model and what strategy is and a bunch of different factors, it's easier for somebody like me to talk about this and opine it when you're trying to meet monthly numbers. But it doesn't change the reality of the game today. Yeah. The winners are going to be those that can be patient and that can win trust. And it's not about being laid back and just waiting for business to come in either. It's about really understanding what your value proposition is and doing the things that demonstrate you really give a damn about who the people are you're trying to serve. And oftentimes that goes against the grain of making near-term revenue.
Yeah, because it costs money to do that.
Yes.
And it's not, as we talked about, it's not easily measured. And so how do companies that are all different levels, I suppose, in their life cycle, what's your experience on how they can do that but deal with the day-to-day, looking at the sales and the bottom line? How have you seen people do that?
Well, in our 14 operational companies, we're taking a very different approach, and it's not something that a lot of legacy operators can do. Because when you have high fixed overhead and a way of doing things, it's very difficult to change that dynamic. You really need to exit your business and start from scratch.
Right.
most of the time. And again, I'm not trying to be cavalier in saying that, but just a reality. In our 14 operating companies, we keep very agile, low overhead allocation. So, we have a team of about a dozen folks that are very expert in certain areas. We can move them around to different things very inexpensively with high degrees of efficiency. And we don't have offices. We have a few, but we don't have high overhead. We're very agile. And today, the idea, as Rita McGrath brings out, who I've talked about quite a bit from Columbia, the idea of the end of competitive advantage and the ability to be able to navigate a kind of a transcendence of change in that way is not really part and parcel of common or traditional, let's say, business thinking, which is planning is based on extemporate, kind of extending the assumption of the past to the future.
Yeah.
And, you can't, it's hard to do that anymore. So ratcheting out cost, having people that are highly flexible and able to deal with a lot of change without fear. And then really understanding your community, which is hard to do well. A lot of people think they know and they don't really know anything.
Right.
And it's hard to know. I don't want to say that in a kind of a cavalier way, but it's true. Taking the blinders off is very difficult, especially if you've been successful in the past.
Yeah. Well, it's just for people who don't know of you, give us a little bit of background on sort of how you started and how you got into the fitness industry and why you chose this as an industry to focus on.
Yeah, it was all happen chance. You had a great story about how you got in the space, and you kind of hear this more commonly than not, right? It's fantastic. So I had a background in finance, went to work for a guy named Al Copeland in New Orleans, who was the founder of all things of Popeye's Fried Chicken. And he was growing quite a bit. That was in the early 80s. And that's when the personal computer came out. So, having gotten out in finance, I was one of the first young people that knew how to use spreadsheets. And so with an entrepreneur who was growing his business, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was one of his right-hand financial people. We grew that business to be $1 billion. And we did a very large acquisition, and we had manufacturing, real estate, it was a conglomerate, and did that for a number of years. And what a wonderful experience, because he was so entrepreneurial. He was a New Orleanian, where my family is from. He was very generous to me. And there were a lot of key executives that he had recruited, and I was at a very young age, worked very hard and learned a tremendous amount from these people. And they gave me a great freedom to apply technology, to not really hold me back. It was a very entrepreneurial organization. So that was really the nexus. I was very fortunate. Met my wife, Maureen, who was a CPA, ran her own companies at the time, very, very adept. And we went out on our own in the early 90s. So, and then started building brands and learning. We were instrumental in the beginning of Smoothie King, which is now a global brand, several other food brands. And then in 97, the Francos, who were well known in the space at the time, in Mandeville, Louisiana, they had a mutual friend who reached out to my wife to become a contract executive in their phenomenal health club, and knew the principles and started learning about the business. Maureen really helped them turn that business around, and then I started doing work with them as well. So that's 20-something years ago. And they're very gracious to us as well, with the benefactors of kind people. We then started working a lot in the space, learning about it, and applying a lot of the disciplines that we had learned in other industries, because the space in general was pretty unsophisticated when it came to a bunch of basic things. And then met our partner, Robert Dyer, when Les Mills was realigning their distributor positions in the United States, became his partner, and that was 15 years ago almost. So grew that business, so that we kind of went from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you see yourself as more of a kind of financial investor, or are you an entrepreneur, would you say, or both?
Entrepreneur is a label now I almost hate to use, because I hate to label myself, because I write books and speak, and I'm an operator. I've operated my own companies with my wife and other partners, and advise a lot of people today and have in the past. So I hate to label that. I think that we're just trying to do good work and help our people grow and help our clients and customers in the different businesses we're involved in the best we can. I hate the label, but you can label me whatever you want.
Yeah. In terms of sort of where, I guess, where you focus, do do you sort of look at companies and I suppose study them? Are you more analytic and financial, or are you like I've sort of seen an opportunity and jump on it and I suppose kind of make things happen? Where does your
it depends on the moment, right? And then it's just not all about me.
Right.
It's about a team of people. So that's what's really fantastic, because our partner Robert, people like Michael Bruno's a dear friend, a colleague, a partner. I could just go through a litany of people. Pardon me, Rasmus Ingerslev. I just go through a name of names and lists of people that we've collaborated with in different ways in different scenarios. So. It just depends.
Right.
Having done this in many, many years and having so many other people, the head of our marketing group, Brandy, Robert's phenomenal in education, Mike Worrell at Vertimax, Al, the group at Fitness 24/7 Thailand, Christian, Magnus. I mean, I just can go on and on and on. Every group of these people have, unique, special gifts. And so when you get involved in things, you try to figure out, hey, where do we help move chess pieces? And the big driver behind that, I think more than anything, is building, trust, and trying to understand, and then playing the role that we can. Sometimes it's transactional for me. Sometimes it's very strategic. Sometimes it's cultural. People development. It depends. So. I don't fit any one thing, I don't think, but you'd have to ask other people what they think.
Yeah. You obviously got a good understanding of many different parts of I suppose, this category, which is what the world of fitness. What in your mind, excuse me, where do you think where's the industry come from, and sort of where do you think we are today? And we talked a little bit about the sort of business life cycle of an individual business. If you were to lay that upon the industry itself, how would you overlay that in terms of kind of where you think the industry is now?
Yeah, and so you first want to ask yourself, what do you mean when you say the industry?
Yeah, good question.
That's actually, the first thing, right? Because if you think in the terms of retail, shopping experience, retail's not retail in the sense of bricks and mortar buildings anymore. Healthcare is not the definition of hospitals anymore. And you see, industry spaces being redefined by arenas. They're not industry spaces anymore. And I think that fitness is going through that same thing.
How would you sort of define how would you talk about, I suppose, like the health, fitness and wellness space, and what would you, how would you define this sort of world that we're in?
Yeah, it's going to become increasingly interesting. And it's both, models that it represents and the experiences it delivers, and just everything about it. You're going to see the pure digital component continue to grow. You're going to see in store, in bricks and mortar, in physical experience continue to grow in different ways, not pure fitness. We talked about share of wallet and what's happening with brands that are like Equinox, some of the forerunners who are entering lodging, vacation experience, entertainment. They're broadening out where it's becoming embedded in lifestyle increasingly. As part of that, you're going to see exterior players enter the space, both on the entertainment side, the lodging side, the digital side. Airbnb offers wellness and fitness experiences. You see Lululemon in apparel. You see Gymshark, coming in lift clubs in the UK. So, just like we saw in the smoothie business with Smoothie King, smoothies weren't limited to just, a single experience to store. It's going to be very, very broad for the customer. It's just only going to continue in the ways that it's offered. But I think that the traditional gym, it's not going away, it'll be there, but it will be a shrinking component of the delivery system of the market. We're still a pretty small, relatively small industry space. So it would be like some people in the music industry being very upset about digital or other offerings. And as I pointed out in many of my talks, while Sony was very upset about getting their party crashed, the truth was that live performances and the consumption of digital content has soared since digital has emerged. And that whole industry has gone through a reinvention. I think we're going to see the same types of things in our space. And it's going to destroy a lot of competitors that exist now, and it's going to create a lot of delivery that we never imagined. The greatest experiences in business models haven't been invented yet.
How do you think businesses that are in, and I'll sort of loosely label it the industry, but how do you think businesses should look at themselves in terms of where the white space and opportunities are? Do you think a lot of businesses are looking quite narrow? Because we talked off camera about how it is quite challenging at the moment. A lot of the well-known brands and probably people that listen to this have had tough times, whether that's a club side, supply side. We're going through quite a change. But then there's other people and brands that we spoke about which are just exploding, that could be sort of, like a Peloton. I'm not sure that's a great example, but there's people chucking a huge amount of money. So how do you think existing businesses should look at themselves, and what's your sort of view on the opportunities?
Well, it's really hard to look at yourself because there's all these anomalies always going on, as historically has always been the case. Right now when you look at Peloton, we're awash in too much capital. There are a lot of business models that are highly overvalued because there's just a lot of money chasing deals. And that sounds great in the near term, but in the long term, it's going to be a bad hangover. And, we believe there's a significant correction of the capital markets in fitness coming.
Why do you think there's a lot of sort of money going off?
Because the central banks have been printing money like no one's business for the last decade, trying to float the boat of everybody. And, for many reasons, that's a whole podcast by itself. But nonetheless, valuations in the unicorn models have been ridiculous. You saw what happened with WeWork. You've probably read my article about Peloton and what I think. I'm very much long-term, against those kind of valuations. I don't think they're good for the industry. But listen, they have to happen. It's a risk-return dynamic. People have to experience it. There's no way to preclude it. It's just a function of economics, right? So the point of bringing that up is to answer your question, because a lot of people will sit in business and look at something like that and think, oh, shucks, I missed the boat. Well, when you play long ball, you don't think like that. The other thing is that it's hard for extant kind of legendary brands or legacy brands to compete in a new world when they haven't shifted their mindsets. And that's easy for me to say, right? Because a lot of success is sometimes it's inertia. You're getting maybe more rewarded than you should be because you've just been around for a while. That's okay. But the gravy train comes to an end. And sometimes because you're the newbie, you get more attention than you deserve. So, and that's one of the benefits of taking a long view. And for businesses today, I think strategy, the vast majority of companies in our space, in most spaces, they don't really have a long-term strategy. They're very busy trying to close their numbers every month. And I respect that. You have to make payroll. But at the same time, it's really about being focused on what matters. That's hard to do. And it's very hard to change your mindset in a world where the constructs of 20 years ago are becoming less relevant into how you actually conduct your business. So things like being trusting, aligning with partners in ways that you can share risk, that are more able to diversify your offering as you learn without fixed cost. These things are real things. They're just hard to do. So it's very difficult when you're a legacy business. And I think that we're going to see that happen in our space and others where, the business itself has potential, but it's difficult for people to wrap their heads around, well, how are we going to do things differently? Especially in the world that's going on, you're seeing all these variables, happening. You may question yourself about what's shiny and new, why I'm not there. Discerning what the benefit of the near term and long term gets more challenging. For a lot of companies, they need to sell and get out and reassess.
Really?
But that's not easy for people to do.
No.
No.
What's your view then on the traditional fitness space then? Do you think it's, my view is it's tough for a lot of people. Are you seeing that? And what do you think is causing that? Just because people have not changed with what the consumer wants?
Well, first off, you have great juggernauts. Planet Fitness, the largest brand in the world, huge price opportunity on their stock years ago, giant return on investment. Kudos to them. Greg and some of their folks. Craig sits on he's our digital officer, chief digital officer, sits on our board at Fitzy. Without giving away secrets, we know some of the things they're working on. The digital physical divide. They've reached now 14.5 million customers. Phenomenal brand story. They're crushing it. Low price model. Selling memberships via Amazon. Just all new stuff. So kudos to them. Similarly with Renee in Europe. McFit. The groups out there. Phenomenal. They're crushing it. You know the story of the low price, high volume type of dynamic happening in the market overall. So there's a lot of success stories, right? There are a lot of success stories in the boutique market. There's just a ton of great business models out there that are doing well. And there's a ton of legacy models that are struggling. I don't want to name names to make anyone feel offended. But you know who they are. You can read the rags. And it's difficult. I would go back to what happened to Kmart and Sears in the United States or other brands in shopping. And at the same time, I go back to what's happened in the U.S. recently with Target in those markets. They had to spend $7 to $8 billion to reinvest their business model. They did, and they're crushing it. It's just that it's hard to do when you're that invested in a way of doing things that doesn't relate to today. Very hard. So.
And what would you say are some of the drivers for that change? Is it technology, which is what one of the things that you're particularly known for? Is that what's changing consumer behaviour and needing these companies to change, or is it just the evolution and companies probably sticking to a business model and not evolving it?
Or making incremental change. That's not really strategic. Yeah, it's very hard to innovate out of that and reinvent. Very, very hard. Very few businesses actually pull it off. So then I think in those situations, it's a lack of internal candor, a lack of culture that really enables people to be real about what's happening and what it takes. The Stockdale paradox, confronting the brutal facts without ever losing hope. That's easy to say, very hard to do. So I don't think most legacy brands will survive because it's just too hard to do what I'm describing. You can read Good to Great, it's an old classic, to show the demonstration of those brands that figured it out. And they did it, and it was very hard. They were very exceptional. I think today maybe 4 or 5% of brands in general that are legacy are able to really think about and execute what they really need to do. And that's great for the entrants that are new, that know. And they'll take their customers.
And you've seen a lot of different businesses then. Is this sort of picture that you're describing just typical for all businesses over a certain age, or is there anything that's happening today that's accelerating that more than normal, do you think?
Yeah, there's so many dynamics at play right now, and there's a lot of mythology, so we would have to spend many times and write a few textbooks to make a case, and there still would be people that would argue with it, right? So one thing is in the last decade, we're in an unprecedented boom economy globally. Not for everyone. There's a huge income disparity happening, but there's a lot of available capital. And so that's one background dynamic that's been going on that's keeping businesses afloat both in the startup community and in the legacy community through financial engineering. So that's one dynamic. That doesn't last forever. Another dynamic is just the ability of entrants to gain share depending on their market. So legacy brands have intrinsic advantages from scale. And so even though their businesses may not be firing on the cylinders they need to, there's going to be a sense of inertia in the sense of it's not going to be as fast as you think it was to knock them off. So there are many, many moving parts. And typically what we see, just like in the earthquakes in California, where we are in Southern California, you don't feel the immediate friction of the tectonic plates, but when it happens, everyone feels the earthquake. And that's when you see what you're going to see. And you're going to see some brands that are, fairly well established go bankrupt. And that's going to happen at some point because the game's going to come to an end. And that's not me being, negative. It's just the reality of the reinvention of the market, which is changing, precipitously. just a matter of time till those shifts are realized.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are in your view, and I've sort of seen one of your presentations, but what are some of the things that you think companies that will thrive are going to be doing or going to need to do, or what sort of trends, or I don't know what you call them, like trends, or I guess how would you describe it? Like business attributes are people got to do now? Trust was one that you mentioned. That's going to be an important thing. But what are the things the companies that probably have got the ability to pivot should be thinking about or looking at?
Well, one of the first things, let's talk about success and what thrive means. Because what a great thing about today is, and we talked about the music industry recently, when you say thrive, that doesn't mean that you need to be a unicorn, right? There are going to be fitness professionals and other professionals in other industries like musicians who are going to thrive and make $150,000 a year and produce their content and be happy with a very great group of loving followers and create something they should be very proud of. And there's nothing again, the same thing's going to happen with some fitness studios who may say, I don't want one lick of technology in my space. We're going to create this experience and do it very well, and they're going to be very successful. So I don't want to be, broad strokes in the sense of success is going to be relevant. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. And people shouldn't be too caught up in the notion that they have to be a unicorn to be successful. In fact, that's kind of a damaging ethos today, because there are a lot of great little couple $100,000 companies that are going to be hugely great, serve a lot of great people, and have a sustainable business model and maybe reinvent themselves. Ghost kitchens right now are a great example, right? And what's happening in the food business, rethinking models and how you're able to, be so frictionless and reinventing yourself. So I don't want to talk about big things without giving a lot of credit to smaller business people in the fitness space that are going to do phenomenal things, and they're not necessarily going to be Apple. But they might use Apple's tools to do what they need to do. So that's the great thing, because today that possibility and potential is probably larger than it's ever been. So let's start there. So in the big trends of what's happening, I think that embedded health and fitness in everything, lodging, restaurant, travel. You see the stuff on airlines now. I think Les Mills has some programming with Air New Zealand. Kind of everywhere and anywhere, embedded into all forms of experience. Entertainment, Netflix, content, music, really anywhere you want to have a wellness experience, you're going to be able to have it. So in the broad stroke, and that's good, rising tides lift all boats, right? So I just see it proliferating through every distribution channel, and being kind of reinvented. I mean, think about what's happened with food in the last decade.
Yeah.
You can be a foodie, which means going out to a restaurant, watching a TV food program, pulling up an app, cooking at home, having experiences when you travel. I mean, the same thing's going to happen with betterment, health, fitness, entertainment, nutrition, mindfulness, recovery, activity, socialization, all these things, and just delivered in just an infinite number of ways. Now, on the broad stroke, kind of stroke of scale, you're going to see digital players doing that. And what you're going to see is new interfaces around that, new kinds of experience. The smartphone, probably in the next decade, is going to become a much more diminished aspect of our being.
Really?
Voice interface with digital logic attendance. Glasses are coming back. Expect Apple to release those in the next 24 months. Ambient recognition of voice. So, voice everywhere, so that if I want to know what my resting heartbeat is, I don't even have to know, it's knowing for me. It's telling me, Bryan, you need to relax. Your heartbeat's elevated by 20% this afternoon. Cut down on the caffeine. These become real aspects of embedded experience, where you don't need to go to a gym. Not that you're not going to. My wife and I all love to go to a movie theater still, but we can watch a movie at home. So it's just going to be everywhere. In our cars, BMW, they have embedded technology to weigh you when you drive and take collection and know intelligently how to advise you on how you're doing. These are all very real things. So I see the spectrum growing in ways that are just unimaginable right now.
And you mentioned that there's also a lot of confusion, and I saw one of your slides where you say, on one side with, the people are getting sicker, but they're spending more money on
weight loss
and diet things. So what's your view on that? Are people just also very confused, and how do you see businesses being able to sort of assist that? Because like I say, we had an interview prior to this, and anybody that says there's this, there should be one idea, you should eat this food. There's an equal opinion to say you shouldn't do that, and so I suppose there must, even in people in the industry, there's a lot of confusion. What does the consumer think of that, and how do businesses, how do business navigate through that sort of situation?
That's the whole trust dynamic we were talking about, right? In the end, you could look at that in the near term of the next few months. You look at that in a few years and how trends will really catch on. In the end, it's going to be about people feeling good about what happened, over time, and then talking about it. And then brands doing the right things by them, so they know they're not trying to screw them out of a few bucks. And if it works and it makes a heck of a lot of sense, and people feel good about it, and they know they're not, taking advantage of them, that's a good road to success.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you should say that. It's sort of starting to make sense in my mind that there is so much information nowadays.
Too much.
Whether it's whether you're owning a business or whether you're a consumer, and it's very difficult to work your way through it. It's
yes, it is.
I guess technology gives you an information overload.
Too much, and bad information. As we talked about, unfortunately, the web and the idea of democratized information has been hijacked by governments, and kudos to the European Union being more cracked down on Google. These are monopolies, and they're taxing our industry and a lot of other industries under the notion of giving free stuff away when they're not doing that at all. They're stealing our data, and they are doing things purposefully to gather people's attention around conflict, around distrust, to monetize what their platforms are. And the future of the internet is going to be different than our present future because it doesn't work. It's just a matter of when. And our governments are going to have to crack down on what the hell's going on right now because we have monopolies, and they are not helping us innovate around the best thing.
Because it's an echo chamber, isn't
Yes.
it? So if you think, just a simple example we were talking about earlier, if you suddenly get into a plant-based diet, then everything everywhere is plant-based diets. Or if you're a paleo, then everything, and they're just serving you up whatever you believe or you're starting to look at. So where you think, I guess, you're free to choose information, you're not. You're just getting cleverly remarketed whatever you start looking at.
Correct, or even worse, they're going to offer you up images of animals being slaughtered to get you to react to that as a plant-based person, which is exactly what Cambridge Analytica did and other people manipulating people for an end. And that's where you really get into scary dystopian stuff. And that's what monopolies do when they have that much people's attention. Business like Facebook, which has been appalling in some of the things that it's been a part of in the last several years, having several billion users, largely being unregulated, and saying they're not going to get involved in what's true and not true, and having people basically buying access to manipulate you. And this is where the trust thing comes from, because people aren't stupid. They're going to get manipulated to an extent, but inside they understand, I can't, how can I rely on what I'm seeing? And I think that this is both a problem and a huge opportunity, but it's difficult with all the noise. To your point, very difficult with all the noise.
Yeah. Sounds like it's if you can figure out a long-term way of being able to develop trust, it sounds like that's probably a really key thing to be thinking about as a business.
Yeah, it's just hard to do it because it takes stamina. You have to operate your business. It's not easy, especially if you have venture capital behind you pushing you to grow in the near term, because that means you're going to take shortcuts, and for the near term, right? You're going to spend £50 million promoting Peloton in the UK to get revenue, because your valuation needs to be that way. And listen, that's great. There's some smart people doing that, but in the end game, It's going to be about what the customer thinks. And you've seen the debacle with the recent commercial our friends at Peloton engaged in. And listen, respect to the Peloton folks, not meaning to speak, it's hard when you have that kind of pressure on you to do all the right things. Really hard.
So let's talk about the customer. We chatted about the millennials, and I know certainly in the fitness space it's all about boutiques and the millennials and how important that is. But you've got a slightly different view of where what probably the market that we should be looking at, and where some of the opportunities are that we're probably not investing in. Do you want to sort of? Well,
and then again, we say we, right? Again,
okay.
that's a very defined segment you're talking about, and there's nothing wrong with it. Certainly, there's a very targeted group of enthusiastic customers that are part of that experience that are millennials. And listen, I test as a millennial, if you can believe it. I take the Pew thing, I test as a millennial. So I'm not, I don't want to make this sound anti-generational, but I do want to bring up, it's a great example of the con game that goes on with people in the distrust issue. This marketplace is not defined exclusively by millennials. That's nothing against millennials. It's just true. And when you look at the share of wallet, the reality is that people in the 50-something-year older group, their wealth is 12 times greater than the millennials in the United States and Western Europe. So, when it comes to share of wallet, it's why Equinox is going into luxury lodging, because the truth is their customer is a lot older than their marketing looks like in people's minds. And there's a reason for that, right? Age shift is a phenomenal cultural phenomenon in the past decade. What a person thinks of themselves at 50 is nothing like they thought themselves 57 in 1975. And so, the reality is grab a share, and that's where lifestyle comes in. That's why you see Lululemon entering into the space with their new formats. It's why you see Equinox going into lodging and travel. It's why you see luxury brands in the hotel business, Allcore and others, going into the wellness space. They're going after share of wallet in the fitness well-being space, just in new ways that these models that we're talking about here can't. And again, it doesn't mean that the boutique models aren't highly relevant. They are. They're great. No doubt in certain markets like London, they're entirely overbuilt. They're not sustainable. But in the big macro trend view of the world, there's a hell of a lot more money in the 50-plus marketplace than there is in the lower marketplace. And you're going to see.
What's that by? How do you know in terms of any scale of what the difference is between the size or the value of those two markets?
Yeah, net worth 12 times that.
12 times.
Compared 12 times. So, and what you think of is this, even things that we may not have talked about before. So Lifetime Fitness, brilliantly, is building their WeWork spaces in their Lifetime spaces. Great example of new age thinking. Because the truth is the number of people who are professionals now that don't go to offices and work remotely is giant. And their share of wallet is huge. So what are they doing? They're reinventing their model. They're not dumb. Their customer is more of the late 40s, early 50s and above crowd. And they have a hell of a lot more money to spend. Now, again, this doesn't mean that the boutique market isn't going to have its plates, and that's, but because it is. But when you look at the marketplace, I think sometimes we get a little head fake by defining ourselves in ways that are very trendy to the moment when there's this whole other world going on. And that's only going to continue. And it's exciting because what that means is there's a heck of a lot of business opportunity that hasn't really been touched upon. Look, Lifetime, they've got a great CEO. He's a brilliant guy. They've got a lot going for them. And when you watch a brand like that pivot around their strengths doing these things, it should tell you something. The same with Rainier, what's going on in Europe. You can see these really smart people. They get that. They know where the revenue is.
Yeah. So with a lot of revenue being, and I take your point, it's not that there isn't anything in the younger market. There is, but there's certainly a bigger opportunity in the older market, which you don't traditionally hear or see about, and in terms of marketing and products, you don't see that.
Yep.
What are some of the things that relevant to that age group? Because you wouldn't have thought the older people are into technology as the younger millennials are, and they're not looking at Facebook and all that sort of stuff. So is there any things that people probably wouldn't know as to what is relevant to that? What do they call them, boomers or something?
It's a bad name, right? Because it connotes things, just like saying older people.
Right.
Because if you talk to someone,
I'm one of those, I guess. Now.
Yeah, well, you're a good-looking older guy, but but if you say older to a lot of people now, and I know several of them, I'm not going to say names, they're gorgeous people, very fit people, and they're in their 50s and 60s, and they're in our industry. And if you called them a boomer or older, they'd be offended maybe. But most of them, I think, wouldn't be. But they're pretty jovial folks. But that's the labelism of things. Because, and the other thing around that is, of course, when you look at slices of time, you'll see disproportion on technology adoption, right? But just like me, I test as a millennial. I was an early technology adopter, and I was into social media before most people were into it. And so these are ideas of labeling people to fit in certain buckets. It just doesn't fit them. And similarly, as you know, in many boutique experiences, there are people in their 50s that are highly fit, and they're highly fit, doing boutique experiences. And similarly, there are going to be people in their 30s who are going to want to do luxury wellness travel. So, this is where I think ageism and a lot of and again, leading to marketing, social media, trust, we just have to be careful about how we're defining industry spaces, trying to put labels on people that don't fit anymore. Right. I think the last thing I looked at, and I may be wrong, but I think the median age of a selfie was a female was 48. And then you see emerging platforms like TikTok skews young, and a lot of these platforms, they'll matriculate into older age. The other reality behind it is what's going to happen with tech, becoming more and more like the air we breathe. Smartphone devices where you see the bad that's come from technology, interrupting our, ability to be present, distraction. A lot of people associate that with mental health. There's a lot of challenges to that. You see a lot of young people being highly addicted to their phone devices. Even older people, pardon the pun, not older, but 50, 60 years, they're on that phone 200 times, a day.
Is that fairly universal through different ages, or does it?
It's still, but you'll see over time, as you look at it, it tends to even out over time.
Really.
But as tech goes on, what's going to happen is that barrier is going to start whittling away because of voice. Because of visual, because of intelligence, because there's always unintended consequences to technologies, and then we create new technologies to overcome those things so that the next technology wave can overcome those things.
Right.
When you see, unfortunately, people getting injured by self-driving cars, but I think automobile deaths in the United States are probably one of the leading causes of death. So you go, okay, that's a very bad situation that happened because one person was killed. You compared that to the present alternative, and then, or similarly, people are getting very mentally disturbed or harmed by their focus on the smartphone. Well, what if we had an intelligent, interface that could drown out the noise and then help feed you what was really relevant? Or condense it in a way that it wasn't so, getting in the way of your ability to function as a normal human being. So I think those interfaces are going to make that gap even more irrelevant over time.
Yeah. And what about now? How are people? How do you see people and businesses communicate to all ages? Is it those sort of key platforms? Is it the Google, the Facebooks, and the Instagrams? Is that where everything's really going through?
Podcast. Yeah. Well, you know the stats, so yeah, that's where people are spending a lot of their attention. But I think we're reaching a tipping point soon. You've seen the latest press, people wanting to opt out. It's too much. The BS factor, the trust issue. Just look at Instagram in the last few years. Organic reach is way, way, way down. You're having to pay for access. There's a lot of things going on there. I think, again, those platforms won't be the future of the internet. We'll see them go away. They'll be replaced by new things. And as I mentioned before, hopefully governments and business leaders will start to understand the tax that is being imposed on us through the advertising cost of access when you have monopoly powers controlling 80-90% of the internet, which is not ideal.
No.
No, it's bad.
So what do you see then? If we look and broadly use the industry, but what do you see some of the things that are likely to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Trends, communications, what that we haven't spoke about. Where do you see things going?
Well, we talked about the business models, right? Embedded, ambient, spreading through all distribution experience channels, retail, dining, travel, lodging, home, all aspects of health, wellness, delivery, pure digital, all access, intelligence, more and more intelligence, the ability to opt out where you're starting to screen interface. So that's going to lead to a whole slew of new concepts, uninhibited access to tech. So voice, visual, all these different interfaces. Ear, you've seen the latest iPods. I have one over there. You can push the thing, you hear ambiently. You don't have to take them out of your ears to talk. Some people are going to be wearing these small devices all the time. So just, with digital assistants kind of making it easier to consume, I think those are all going to be very real. I think business models we never thought of are obviously going to emerge, doing all kind of things we never would have thought of. I think human enhancement is going to become a bigger thing, especially with active aging happening more and more.
What's human enhancement?
So human enhancement can be anything from pharmaceuticals, about microdosing, certain hallucinogens. There's all kind of trends around the ability to enhance human performance through a cadre of different things, including embedding technologies in our bodies. And a slew of other things, and DNA enhancement. A lot of those things are very up and coming and real dynamics now that in the next 20 years I think are going to become more mainstream.
Right.
And of course, medical and what's happening there, the whole disruption of that industry, where the shift to prevention and how that works out. The United States being more challenging than other nation states who have a more centralized delivery system, to try to promote activity and other good things for mental health and other stuff, making that more embedded into people's cultural behaviors and support and how we deal with that as a country or as a people. So I think the general idea of it, though, is that the industry is going to grow very big. It's just not going to be the same industry we know.
Yeah. And you talked about it earlier, the differences between like the United States and Europe and Asia. How would you sort of, you obviously travel a lot and get to see different businesses in different markets. How would you describe the sort of evolution of the sort of fitness and wellness space in different parts of the world?
It's fascinating to me. I think Europe is doing some of the most interesting things. Basic Fit and Renee, brilliant, a full production company on content, serious automation, really thoughtful technology automation in their product, growing in markets that are just, just doing very, very well. And, they're a public company. They're very successful. So shout out to Renee and the team over there and many others in Europe. There are just so many great innovators in Europe. My friend Rasmus Ingerslev and what he's doing with Repeat and his businesses. And there are many, many others that are just phenomenal operators. I mentioned McFit's founder in that group and many others. I'm leaving some people off, forgive me. Humphrey at Pure. And on the supplier side, in Europe, Perfect Gym and their platforms. Our friends at Legend and Sean. These people are all very, very thoughtful, innovative people. Europe has, I think, more barriers in a certain sense than the Americas. The cost of labor, the cost of doing business is higher in general, right? So, and we talked about the UK, I think, is the most competitive market in the world. It's nothing like the United States. If you were there, like I go quite frequently, and you see it, it just blows your mind, right?
What do you think causes that over there than in any other market, do you think?
They're just more mature, I just think it's been around, it's a more mature market. But fantastic. So, and then Pan-Asia, so much stuff going on in Asia. You go to China and you see robots in the malls promoting gym memberships, things that you wouldn't see here. And, the Americas, there's a lot going on here as well. Great stuff by my friends at Planet and our friends there and others. Phenomenal, Orange Theory, what they've done. I've worked with them for many years. So there's a lot of great innovation. I really am keen on Europe right now and Asia and seeing what's happening there. I just think it's very, very fascinating, watching what's going on. And as I mentioned, Equinox, our friends at Lifetime. I mean, they're doing some really neat, innovative things, as are other industry spaces coming in, as we mentioned before, both on the pure digital side, lifestyle side. Just a lot going on. So
I know you mentioned Equinox, and they've got their traditional clubs and their boutiques, and now I heard they've got their own version of Peloton, and you mentioned Renee doing the digital stuff. Do you see traditional fitness clubs now sort of expanding those four walls and going into people's homes and providing more content?
Of course, and you have the Wexers out there helping them do that, and others doing that great. And you see what Techno's doing with their offering. You see what Equinox is doing, and others, even small operators streaming and monetizing the streaming. Basic Fit, I think they generate around 35 or 40 million pounds a year just on their digital app content. I think that's right.
What are your thoughts on that sort of category? Because I guess it's a new space, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think that if you're going to be a brand experience, and that's what Equinox is doing, right? You're going to want to try to engage the customer in that 24/7 realm of service so they can experience you. How easy is that to do for some brands? I think it's going to be hard for some brands because you have to get in the content business and you have to become adept at technology. That's why you need really good partners. And for a lot of the people that have started that out, they're kind of new to it, so there'll be some learning. That's why I respect what Renee and their group have done so much. That's why you got to respect what Equinox is doing so much, because they're really getting into that space all in. But if I was a brand in brick and mortar, which we have interest in those, but owning the entire brand, I think that you really want to try to be a content creation business and an integrated business with technology to provide that experience both in club and direct to home.
You talked about partnerships. What do you see partnerships between manufacturers, like the traditional manufacturers and bricks and mortar clubs? And you referenced Wexer. Do you see there being more of that type of collaboration happening?
I think it's challenging. I think, yes, that's like in frictionless commerce today, the ideal world, and you know this, you're an operator in your own company. The ideal world is to have really defined partners with super expertise that are aligned with you in a way you can share risk and effectively execute together, right?
But because Technogym are kind of doing that with some of their...
Well, that's a whole thing. My friends at Technogym, that's a whole thing. Because it's, as well as you're doing that, when you're a supplier, you're also maybe, getting some channel conflict. And so it's, you got to be careful. And they partnered up with Rebel out of the UK to generate some other players for distribution of that experience. So that's smart on their part. I have a lot of respect for what they've done. I know that Core Health and Fitness is doing things. Michael Bruno's doing things in that realm to help their customers on the content end. I think there's going to be a distinction between suppliers in the equipment space who are selling bent steel, rubber, and motors versus solution providers on the content end. I think some will be obviously probably much more adept at doing that than others, because it's not just something you're going to, pull off like that, right? So I think some will be far more successful at it, and perhaps, as you're seeing now, creating very white-labeled, customized content for brands. Because if I'm a 24-hour, or like with Renee with Basic Fit, I'm going to want to own that experience myself. I'm going to want to really have that experience. I'm going to want to create the Basic Fit content for you and as a customer, right? So when you see that experience or have it via your streaming, TV, or in my club, there's a continuity to that experience, right? So I think some of those suppliers will hopefully get better at helping those brands figure that out. Or in the case of Renee and his group, they're just going to do it themselves and partner with a wax to distribute it.
You've obviously got experience in both the bricks and mortar clubs and the manufacturing, the equipment side of things. If you kind of think of what's happening, it's almost like, in some ways, you could have the equipment being a competitor to the people that they're supplying. Do you kind of see that as well?
Yeah. Remember Borders Books toasted champagne with Amazon they did their deal. So Borders Books, which was a bricks and mortar bookstore,
right?
They shifted to selling their books digitally through Amazon. They toasted it, right? They thought it was great. You can Google it. Yeah, look what happened. So yeah, I think there is some of that reality. And people are going to have to pick, where are you going to compete?
Yeah.
And what's your value proposition? Today...
Because Peloton are kind of equipment, content, club, they're sort of like the whole thing, aren't they?
Yeah, but far less on the club side.
Yes.
But you don't know, they may, back up, like Warby Parker. They were first to, in the eyewear business, they were first to market via internet and then open flagship stores.
Right.
Or like Apple.
Like Amazon even.
Yes. Or like Apple. The gangster move of the 20th century was Apple getting into retail. People are like, what the heck are you doing getting into retail? Most successful retail operator, in the last, several decades. So I think when we talk about business models we haven't thought of, we talk about industries versus arenas, when we think about competition and we talk about the greatest business models haven't been invented yet, those are great examples of things that are going to play out in different ways, some of which I don't think we can anticipate today. Right. But they're all real now. They're all channels to customer. They're all paths to market that didn't exist not that long ago,
Right. And it seems as though there's a lot more direct to consumer communication. So whether you are a brand selling B2B, it sounds like you've got to have that B2C link, which you probably didn't have to have before, I suppose.
Yes. And it's easy to say those things. It's very hard to execute.
Yeah.
And again, not to, the Beachbody people try to get into the club market and they've had to pull back. You can have core competencies and think, I'm going to get there. And, some very smart people have failed. Doesn't mean that it's not legit, but you can't be everything to everybody all the time either. So you have to really pick and choose and know what the heck you're trying to do. And even then, you can get it wrong. It's challenging. But the good news at the end of the day is this: the marketplace is going to grow a lot. But there's still going to be the Sonys who cry over the change in the music model, saying that it's the end of the world, when the reality is that live music consumption has gone up tremendously in the last 2 decades. And it's really what's best for the customer. Yeah. And we have to accept that reality and compete in that world and not get mad at them over it,
So before we wrap up then, so there's some interesting stuff that you spoke about, a few things that have stood out to me. But if you're a very experienced business person, certainly compared to myself.
I don't know about that.
You've certainly weathered a few storms, I'm sure. What are some of the universal things that you think we could, as business people, be conscious of and I know it's very difficult, but the industry is going to grow, we know that, and it's going to change, we know that. But what are some things that we could just be mindful of to be able to kind of help ourselves anticipate what to do next and how to pivot and how to make some of these changes? Is there any?
So hard.
I know it's a difficult question, but
so hard. Even if you're pen to paper and you try to be as rational as you can, the truth is still most business decisions are made very emotionally, and so it robs a lot of people of objectivity. It's hard to be objective, really hard to be objective. For us, again, trust. Who is really there for you to advise you that you can trust to give you perspective? And that's hard to find, very hard to find, because no one can do this stuff alone. And especially if you've been in a business for a while, you've had a perspective. One of the great things about our space is the generosity of so many people, and who've been very generous to me. I've named just a few of them, and there are many more who I listen to. And similarly, I take calls all week long from people just to be a sounding board. I think that's really, really important because your mindset, especially in a world where there's a lot of confusion. And if you don't accept that there's a lot of confusion, then you got a problem. So I think finding who you can trust to talk to, there's a lot of great organizations out there like URSU. I sit on their board. They're trying to create content. They want the industry to grow. They want to help people navigate this. And then it's your team and culture. Are you making decisions or thinking about things out of a sense of fear? And are you really thinking about things in the sense of what could be, not in a Peter Pan-ish kind of way, but in a way of, can we put aside the number closing every month for just a little while and try to understand our customer better and what our options are and who are our partners? Where are we really having our challenges and who can really help us? Opening yourself up mindset is really, really important, but very, very hard.
Yeah.
Because if you're not capitalized well, you're trying to make payroll, your head's down. And so I get that. Like I've dealt with that. So it's really, really challenging. So whatever you can do to learn and to build trusting relationships with people who are trustworthy. They're not selling you anything. Their background shows they have some understanding. Man, that's what you want to spend some time doing. That's why you do this podcast, right?
Yeah.
So that's the great part.
Yeah.
If you just let it in, but it's not easy to do. No, it's not easy to do.
Great answer. So final question, Bryan. Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you believed is impossible and gone on to make it possible. What would you say is an example of escaping your own personal limits?
Wow. I don't know if I can even speak to that. I'd have to think about that. Escaping my personal limits. I have so many personal limits. We'd have to write a book on that subject, right? Robert Dyer, my partner, we wrote a book called The 9 Partnership Principles.
What, 9 partnership principles?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had a number of people. Emma contributed. I think a few other key people contributed. Michael Bruno contributed. Rasmus Ingers. We had a bunch of people contribute. One of the partnership principles we talk about is blind faith. And while that seems a little counterintuitive, I think that, when it comes down to escaping your limits, at the end of the day, you have to make the best decisions possible. And for the most part, sometimes they may not make any sense. And he writes about this with me in the book. It's very touching because of our own experiences, he and I. And blind faith is like there's another hand going on. You don't really know what it is. And so I think in escaping my limits, it was having faith in others, even when it didn't seem like it was the right thing to do.
Well, that's a great way to end. And I think out of everything, one of the things that's come out of the interview for me is just that the trust, being able to sort of be a trustworthy long-term business, which I guess probably sums up I don't know you very closely, but I'm sure it sums up the way that you deal with a lot of your businesses.
We try. We're not always perfect at it, but we try. But I'm not blowing. I love blowing smoke. I love watching your stuff and keep doing what you're doing because it does make a difference. So, because when you do this for other people, you're building trust. And so we need more people building trust.
Bryan, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew.